My name is Matt Murphy. I'm an illustrator, author, and comic writer. So I spent a lot of time as a kid lost in comics. See, my dad and I never really got along. He was a blue-collar man who didn't have any patience for me, mostly because I was a really willful kid. It always seemed that he was dead set on giving me a hard time. As a way of coping with that, I would escape into the fantasy of comics. The stories and characters became a second home for me. I didn't have to deal with my father coming home angry if I was holed up in my room reading a comic book. So it felt natural for me that the first major work of graphic fiction that I would do would be an abstracted version of my relationship with my father, and how I came to accept him not only as an authority and not as an authority figure, but as a person. This work, On Silent Ground, is set in the fall of 6659. And follows Jenart Bench, a blue-collar orbital dock worker, as he tries to keep his son Aleph from capitulating to the same pitfalls that he has. There's Aleph. They both belong to the race of Sycean Machines. We don't call them robots, because that's racist. Anyway, Jenart is torn between allowing Aleph to pursue his dream of being a fighter pilot and keeping him safe from the looming interstellar threat of galactic war. At the risk of alienating Aleph, Jenart chooses the latter, thinking that he's doing the right thing by keeping his son safe from what he believes is certain death. However, like every teenager before him, Aleph rebels and joins the Stellar Navy anyway, leaving Jenart to wonder if he did the right thing. He has to accept that he's done the right thing from keeping him out of danger because of the love he has for his son. Aleph returns years later and recounts with his own son, and Jenart recounts to his father how he felt all those years ago. One of the things I wanted to focus on was how Jenart struggles with his past, and how his father, embittered by the loss of his wife, shaped his perception of the world, with how those we love leave us because of whether we want them to or not. Because of this, Jenart really internalizes his loss and personal fault to an extreme. Therefore, when Jenart loses his husband, when Aleph is young, he feels as if he must cling on to Aleph lest he lose him into the abyss as well. The notion of systemic violence is passed between generations. Appears in the work in the form of the relationship between grandfather, father, and son. For me, it's a very personal one. See, one of my dad's challenges as a young man is that he never had a father figure, really, in the same way that Jenart does. My granddad was absent in my father's life, and my dad was in college. He committed suicide, just as Jenart's father does in the story. This has certainly affected how my dad dealt with me. With only tangential father figures in his life, how was he supposed to know how to be a dad? And as I grew older and learned more about my grandfather and how I fit into the chain of people in my family, I started piecing together my father's loss and how it affected him. So one of the things I get asked a lot is, why robots? In the story, the fact they're robots serves a variety of purposes. For one, come on, they look so cool. But for real, they model in the audience the arc of acceptance that is central to the message of my story. As one engages with the narrative, you start to recognize them not as robots or aliens or something strange and unknowable, but as people with thoughts and fears and feelings, and you come to accept them as that. I've also found that they're an excellent tool for laying bare, for lack of a better word, the humanness that a lot of my stories contain, because we're less concerned with their cultures, creeds, races, and even in some case genders, we can see the universal elements of personhood much clearer. And just like my old man, behind his bluster and blue collar, behind all the shouting matches and barely contained anger, he was a person who loved me. And in the end, that's what mattered. Thank you. For this specific piece of work, absolutely. I wanted to really kind of capture the isolating, lonely nature of blue-collar work. I mean, my dad would work like 12-hour shifts and come home smelling like hell itself because it's a paper mill and there's that like fart smell that comes with that. So I really wanted to try to capture isolation. And so a really clean, really sharp style really formed from that for this particular piece of work. So in the same way, like that starkness and that loneliness and that isolation, I really thought the clean, kind of minimal nature of how it would illustrate this particular work would speak to that as well, right? So like the palette, the lines, the structures, the locations, all are supposed to encapsulate that kind of sense of isolation and loneliness that the protagonist character, Jenart, is experiencing. Well, I mean, like at first it was always this kind of like, I kind of knew that I needed to make them as relatable as possible. But that with the characters with faces as like sharp angled and kind of almost obtuse in a way is its own kind of sets of challenges. So like their eyebrows change shape and their eye structures change shape. But a lot of body language and like angling kind of really informed how the emotions could be carried with the characters. So I sculpted both of these, the protagonist and his son's faces out of clay. And I would use those as like kind of reference. And kind of playing around with those really helped figure out, okay, so if he's looking this direction, automatically his face looks a whole lot more angry than if it was tilted up. And that kind of helped a whole lot. Well, for me, like I've been drawing these like wacky robot people forever, like forever, ever and ever. But like coming into adulthood with them, you know, I started seeing kind of like being able to relate to them a whole lot more than like people that were in my life, and I found that was really like as an analytic personality, I really found that kind of interesting about myself. Like, so why am I doing that? And over the years played around with all kinds of different like storytelling techniques to get people to relate to these like wacky robot people. And it was this program that really pushed me into the direction of just do it. Just like tell the story. The story and the characters are going to make your audience relate to these things or these people through the narrative that you're delivering. I've always like really was more concerned with the everyday and the mundane. I mean, like I remember being a kid watching like all kinds of stuff and like of course reading Neuromancer and that sort of thing. And I've talked a lot about cyberpunk and its kind of style over substance kind of thing, and that kind of turned me off a little bit. And I wanted to bring stories to the table that were very personal, very relatable. And the subject matter made people able to relate to these characters more than if it was some kind of high drama, space opera, right? Like if there's not a human character in this, if there's not a Han Solo in the space opera, you've lost your audience already, you know? And obviously I didn't really want to do Han Solo. I wanted to do this like personal, like drama about father and son.